Namaste. This is Divya Reddy from Infinity Foundation India, and today I have with me my colleague Subhodeep Mukhopadhyay. Welcome, Subhodeep.
Namaste, Divya. Thank you for having me on the show.
And we are here today to discuss two current issues related to our latest book, The 10 Heads of Ravana. It is a critique of 10 Hinduphobic scholars such as Devdutt Patnaik, Shashi Tharoor, Ramchandra Guha, Irfan Habib, Michael Witzel, Romila Thapar, Audrey Truschke, and so on. So the book gives a factual account on why we call these authors Hinduphobic. And recently, the print, which happens to be a very reputed publication, carried a review of this book, The 10 Heads of Ravana, by Mr. Kancha Ilaiah, who also happens to be a scholar whose work we have critiqued in this book. So we'll be discussing that piece. And also in the context of the latest release, the movie Adipurush, the whole trend of referring to the Ramayana as mythology is back. So we'll also be discussing why that is problematic. Now, while the print and Mr. Ilaiah has all the rights to voice their opinion on the book, in fact, we are very happy to engage with them in the spirit of intellectual debate. And we did invite all these scholars for the launch event of the book. Unfortunately, none of them turned up, and Mr. Ilaiah has chosen to respond via this article, which is fair enough. But the problematic aspects of this article is that they have got the basic facts wrong, basic hard facts wrong, which could have been avoided even with just a basic Google search. For instance, the article opens by, I'll just read out that statement from the article. Indian Americans who have written 10 Heads of Ravana aim to decolonize the Indian mindset. Now, all the authors of the 10 Heads of Ravana are Indian citizens, Indian passport holders, while our mentor, Sri Rajiv Malhotraji, who's the editor of the book, is an Indian American. But all the authors are Indian citizens. Now, this could have been averted with just a little bit of background search of the authors, but to just basically get the identity wrong itself is a serious flaw. So, Subhodeep, what do you think of this?
The question is, okay, even if assuming that all of us were Indian Americans, how does it matter? Right. Just because somebody is an Indian American doesn't mean that that their writing on India is not authentic. Whereas if somebody is Indian and they write about India, that is authentic. That is not the case, because we have seen that there are many Indian passport holders who often go to foreign countries. They go to United Nations. They give depositions about India. They make complaints about India that, okay, India has terrible human rights. Please come and intervene and save us. They complain against their own countrymen. There are people who, with Indian passports, demand Kashmir mange azadi and something else mange azadi. There are those entire group of people like that. So the important point is that whether somebody is an Indian American or whether somebody is Indian, where is their interest with regards to India? Are they people who want to see the betterment of India from an indigenous perspective, or are they people who would like to complain and crib and see an India in a state of a constant turmoil? That is I think the most important question.
Right, absolutely. I would like to read out another statement. So here he says, Malhotra owns a financial network called Infinity Foundation in America and runs Garuda Prakashan in Delhi, which has published the book. Now, Infinity Foundation is a registered NGO. It is a think tank specializing in the field of education and research, and we have produced several books and conferences in this regard, and it is all there in the public domain. So even just a basic Google search will tell you what Infinity Foundation is all about. So it is anything but far from being a financial network. And another serious error is that he calls Rajiv as the owner of Garuda Prakashan, while we all know that it is Sri Sankrant Sanu who owns this publication house. Now, it is very startling on as to how you can get such facts wrong, while we all know that Mr. Ilaiah enjoys a reputation of being a very serious academic scholar. Now, such errors only further question the credibility of the print and also Mr. Ilaiah. So, what do you think about these errors, Subhodeep?
Yes, Divya. So that is correct. As you rightly said, it's a matter of basic fact checking. Now, Rajiv ji is a well-known public intellectual, and even Sankran Sanuji is a well-known personality in the field of Indian knowledge systems. So what Sri Kancha Ilaiah and the print have got wrong is they've, somehow confused the editors and the publishers and made them into one combined entity, which, like you rightly said, a little bit of fact checking, they would have found that no, these are two separate entities who have nothing to do with each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Subhodeep, you're the author of the essay on Mr. Ilaiah's work, but here he says the problem with these pseudo intellectuals is that they think abuse is analysis. Now, I have read your essay, but I don't think it is abuse. Would you like to elaborate on that?
But before even going into that, let me clarify for the audience that all the authors, including me, whoever we have critiqued, we have cited extensive evidence in support of our claims. And all the chapters have a long list of bibliography. It has direct quotes made by the people at various points in time, and even other scholars who have written about them. So all these things are there in place. And what we have done is we have made an analysis and critique of this scholarship. It is not an attack on personalities. So this is something we have to be very clear about. And we are writing, we have written what they say. What is our response to that if we find it problematic? And what other scholars have said about the same issue. What the tradition has said about that. So we are trying to give a well-rounded perspective of the different issues raised by these scholars and public intellectuals. So having said that, now let me specifically talk about Sri Kancha Ilaiah ji. So I will just quote what I have written as a part of the introduction of the chapter. And I write, Kancha Ilaiah Shepherd is a noted Indian writer, academician, and a self-described Shudra intellectual. The author of influential books like Why I Am Not a Hindu and Post-Hindu India, he is considered an important Indian social thinker and is referred to as the Good Shepherd. In academic circles, Ilaiah is regarded as a preeminent social scientist, following a long and illustrious line of dissenters and critics of the Hindu social order, and a key player in the fight against violent Hindu assertion. So this is the introduction I've given about him. Please tell me, where is the abuse in this? At least I could not find any abuse. Now, let me just to give an idea of what he has written. I'll just quote some of his key positions. Some of them, a very small fraction of what are his key positions on his area of research, which is India and Hinduism. So in Post-Hindu India, which came out in 2009, he writes, the mother of all parasitic cultures is the culture of Brahmanism. Then in 2018, in an article called How Brahmins Ensured That India Never Progressed, he writes, the Brahmins continue being semi-naked while performing these yagnas and kratus. This reflects their primitive brains and body culture. Then in a 2001 interview that he gave, in Rediff, it's there available, he makes two statements. Yes, I hate Hinduism. I am angry at the Hindu gods. We do not trust the Brahmin leaders. We cannot trust the sadhus and sannyasis who are going naked at the Kumbh Mela. That is one. And he writes also, all Brahmins in India have been consumers in the history of India. They were never the producers. And finally, one last quote from his book, Why I Am Not a Hindu. He writes, Hinduism has never been a humane policy. It is the most brutal religious school that the history of religion has witnessed. Now, I leave it to you and the audience to decide which is abuse and which is not.
Wow, I mean, these just basically they just call for violence. They're very provocative. They could instigate communal disharmony. They're very dangerous writings. And I'm honestly very surprised how they could pass for academic scholarship. So Shubhadeep, I think he's made there are numerous statements that he has made which can be addressed at length, but I think we can wrap up with this one last statement, which appears quite startling to me. Interestingly, in their entire discourse on civilization, there is no mention of the role of agriculture, science, and technology, the very foundations built by ancient Shudras, Dalits, and Adivasis. What I feel is that we have time and again clarified that this book is a critique on the work of these specific scholars and not just a writing or a civilizational discourse. If we have to do that, there will be hundreds of other things that we could be writing about a particular civilization. So, despite clarifying so many things and so many times, and us also specifically addressing their writings and also quoting, I don't know from where this statement arises. So, your thoughts, Shubham?
Yeah, so see, in what has always been the Indian culture, I mean, this is across India, not restricted to any specific state or region, is that when it came to science and technology, see, Indians were always very pragmatic people. So when it came to science, technology, whatever aided in the betterment of society or prosperity of a group as a whole, people were practical and eligible people across communities contributed to science and technology, the development of that. So actually, this is backed by data, British data itself. In Dharampal's book, he cites British sources, the East India Company, when they came initially, they did surveys of the schooling system across India, education system across India. And what they found was very startling, at least startling to us, who have been told that Brahmins, they controlled education. So in terms of students, there were more people of the so-called lower castes in classes, including and even Muslims, than Brahmins. That is one. In terms of teacher, there was a good participation of teachers across different castes and communities, different jatis and communities. That is point number two. And these kind of schools were spread across India and they were encouraged by the parents. So the students were taught different subjects. They were also taught Sanskrit along with the local indigenous language, native language, which was Tamil or Bengali, depending on where the schools were situated. So this system worked and it worked very well. And the reason we know this is again from data which comes from the writings of Angus Madison. In his analysis of world economy, he showed that India and China controlled almost 50% to 60% of the world economy for a very long time, with India in the range of 20 to 25%. And as they say, the proof is in the pudding. So the fact that this system worked is the very fact that India controlled 20-25% of the world economy. And that took a slight hit when the Mughals came, although they did not touch it, but still it went down a little bit. But the moment the British came and the colonization process started, and by 1950s, this 25% came down to 5% level. Because the education system got changed, we started following different systems, different laws. So this actually proves that not only was education inclusive, it was also very practical and forward-thinking with participation across all communities, not one specific community. And see, while there was somebody like Panini, who may have been a Brahmin, there's also somebody like Aryabhatta, equally celebrated, but not from a Brahmin family. So, these kind of statements that the science and technology of the Shudras were ignored, that is completely incorrect. In fact, Infinity Foundation has produced 14 volumes on the history of Indian science and technology, which talks about all these things, the contributions of different communities to India's indigenous science and technology.
Right, absolutely.
So, yeah. And I'll just add one more point. See, he mentions that we have called him Bharat Vikhander because he's, pro-poor and we are not. He's helping the poor and downtrodden. That is not the reason we have referred to him as Bharat Vikhander. It is more in a philosophical sense. Like Bharat Vikhander is the Hindi name or the Sanskrit name of Breaking India book. So it is the idea that India cannot solve its own problems, and hence we need the help of foreigners who will help solve it. At the same time, they will divide India. So that mindset that India is a problematic place, and the only way of solving this problem called India is to break it up. This mindset is what is called Breaking India, and anybody who has that is called the Bharat Vikhander. That is the logic which I applied while we arrived at that title. So Absolutely. It is not about helping the poor or not helping the. That is not the case at all. And this we have elaborated in the chapter itself.
Right. And also the fact that he continually tries to insert these divisions between Brahmins and minorities and so on. So all these can come under the Breaking India forces.
Correct.
So yeah, I just hope the print will course correct these factual errors, at least the hard facts, like getting someone's identity correct, their profession correct, at least these things, even if they want to retain their opinions on the article. I just hope the print will course correct. Okay, Subhodeep, now coming to this movie, the much discussed movie, the Adipurush. It opened to a lot of negative criticism because of several issues, such as poor aesthetics, including the costumes, which look like anything but far away from the popular imagination of the Ramayana, pedestrian dialogues, poor graphics, and so on. So I think there are several issues that can be discussed about the movie. We will discuss the fundamental issue of referring to the Ramayana as mythology. So I first learned the difference between mythology, Itihasa, and history from the seminal book by Rajiv Ji, Being Different. So I'll just read out a few quotes from the book. In the West, it is common to refer to stories such as those of Lord Krishna and Rama as myths. In popular parlance, the word myth usually refers to that which is imaginary, fantastical, fictional, or even superstitious, primitive, or false. What is significant is that it is viewed, at least in the West, as the opposite of truth. And another quote, to a great many Westerners, the religious narratives of other cultures are myths, or more politely put, sacred stories, whereas they regard their own narratives as historically true. Now, this is very interesting. So, could you elaborate more on this, Subhodeep?
Yeah, so as Rajiv Ji has discussed many times, history, mythology, and itihas, these are three different ways of looking at the past. Now, history so see, when I'm using these terms, history, mythology, and itihasa, I'm referring to them in their technical sense, as academic disciplines, and not as in the common usage of history being past or myths being false, not in that sense. As academic disciplines, they have certain origins. For example, when we talk about history, we also need to understand the philosophy of history. And there, as Rajiv Ji has noted, the work of Hegel is very important, because that gives the basic framework on how history as an academic discipline evolved. So once we understand that, then it becomes clear that why history of the West is written in the way it is, and why history of India is written in the way it is. Because by its very definition, when history as a discipline evolved, it was based on the Western experiences, and that was templatized. And that became the gold standard against which entire world histories were now evaluated. So Western history, by definition, is unbiased, neutral, objective. Although it was often the case that kings, then churches, different authorities, they commissioned the writing of history, but still they considered their past as being authentic, the way they evolved as being the golden standard. Now, when you look at India, Indian history, we always complain that, okay, Indian history is not representative of all the people. It eulogizes certain people, and certain people are not even given a footnote. We talk about that. And that again happens because of the very structure of this subject as an academic discipline. So this is some area. This is an area which needs more detailed research to understand that why merely rewriting history will not solve the problem. So this is in terms of history, and Itihasa is, like Rajiv has explained, it's a unique lens to understand our past, the way we look at our past through the Vedic perspective. So it is not merely retelling. It's not merely about narrating what happened in the past, but also about inculcating certain values. Then, it's grounded in tradition, and it must have some kind of message which is relevant to the current era. So all these things must be there. And see, unlike the Western perception of Greek mythology, for example, so they consider the Greeks as some different civilization. It may be their past, but they are different people. But for us, our people, the characters in Ramayana and Mahabharata, we treat them as our own ancestors. So that sense of continuity is maintained in Itihasa. So all these things must be there. Now, when it comes to mythology is again the West's understanding of the way we look at our past. So in our case, it is, we have our Itihasa, and then when the West interprets our Itihasa, they say, okay, it's myth, it contains a lot of stories of fantastic stories of gods and demons and, people fighting in the sky, Pushpak Viman, all these things are there. So that is how they characterize Itihasa and call it mythology. And we are clubbed in the same group as Harry Potter, for that matter. They treat the same, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Mahabharata. So what we consider sacred has been clubbed with bestseller books in the last 200 years. So Itihas and mythology and history, they are not at all the same thing.
Right. Absolutely. That was very well explained, Subhodeep. So I think it is important to stress the fact that mythology, Itihasa, and history are three different categories and cannot be used interchangeably. Now, Itihasa is a Sanskrit non-translatable and has no equivalent in English. And this is something that we ought to internalize. For instance, I remember when movies based on the Ramayana or Mahabharata or any of our Puranas were made in the regional languages, it was always referred to as the Itihasika movies. I mean, even the old actors, whenever they spoke about it, that's how it was referred to. This business of calling mythology and all of that wasn't there, which is the case today. And also, you mentioned this very important point about how we consider the characters of Itihasa to be our ancestors. And with ample evidence, it's not out of nostalgia or we are emotionally connected or something. So to call them as myths, which means a fantasy or something that is not true, it's very demeaning to the Hindus. It is insulting to our very existence and our ancestors. And also, you mentioned this in the context of philosophy of history as a discipline. You mentioned Hegel, a very influential German thinker, and this section from the book Being Different. I would like to read a quote from there. Hegel dismisses the Native Americans as obviously unintelligent and speaks of them as unenlightened children, distinguished only by inferiority in all respects. He also proclaims that India has no history. So this is how the whole discipline of history is built on. Now, Subhodeep, now that we know what Itihasa, mythology, and history means, is it right to call the Ramayana as mythology?
No, it is not at all right to call Ramayana as mythology. So let me make a statement. Only Hindus, pagans, and dead civilizations have mythology, right? So the opposite of this is that the West has history. Like you mentioned, India does not have history. So West has history, and the West has been forced to accept that even the Muslim world has history. They have been forced. But we don't have a history in the sense that they would like, in the sense that they have. Even if we do have a history, it's about losing wars, being conquered by different groups of people, like the Aryans came, then came the Islamic invaders, then the British came. We've always been subjugated and enslaved. So that is fine. That sort of history is fine, but we cannot have a history of progress because we are, by the very definition, not a progressive society. So, see, they consider Ramayana and Mahabharata mythology in the same way, as the way as they treat the Greek and Norse mythology. But interestingly, the historicity of Jesus has never been called into question. So, whether it's the case of the virgin birth, or whether it's resurrection, these have been accepted, and nobody has attempted studies of these as mythologies. I mean, they're studied differently. That study has a different name, but it's not called mythology in the same way as our stories, our traditions are considered. So I don't know if you've heard of these. There's this in History Channel. There's this program called Ancient Aliens in History Channel, and they often feature Hindu deities. So there is this Ancient Aliens, Vishnu's ancient guided missiles, which appeared in season 8. Then there's the Mighty Shiva, season 11. So, and some of the descriptions are like this. In the Mahabharata, the god Vishnu was said to have wielded advanced technological weapons that ancient astronaut theorists believe could have come from our extraterrestrial ancestors. Seriously? Then they say, is the Indian god Shiva really an alien? How else could the Kailashnath temple have been built? See, these are very demeaning statements, denying the skill, talent, tenacity of our ancestors who built these temples. They were advanced for the times. They were good in architecture. They were good in the various sciences and arts, and they were able to build an aesthetically pleasing temple, which has lasted for a long time. But by creating these programs, they're just trying to demean, and they're using these pejorative kind of imagery, but in a very aesthetic way. So much so that even our people, the Indian audience, they just lap it up. These programs are so good. So somebody's writing a comment. Our gods used very advanced machine like Vimanas. Then somebody's writing, every weapon in Mahabharata is real now. Then imagine the level of trueness. These are the kind of comments people are making. The fact that we are being made fun of, that these people are insulting us, but in a very aesthetic way, we are lapping it up. We are accepting that. And this is really, really very sad. I mean, I don't know whether I should use the term which Rajiv uses, moralization, for this, but it could be applicable in this case, that these guys are just making fun of us. So now, see, I'll tell you the other part of this. Suppose we say, okay, Shiva and Vishnu are alien, and you're doing this based on certain things. Now, see, can you see this image on the screen? So if you see this image, it's a photo of Jesus Christ, and behind him you'll see certain items, certain objects. Don't they look like UFOs? These objects.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Correct. Then you see the second image. If you see, again, you'll see those objects, like a UFO, like a spaceship which contains somebody inside and coming from outer space. Then the third image, if you see, this is a clear UFO, a saucer beaming lights to the ground where Jesus is standing and giving a sermon or something. Now, see, would it be fair if scholars looked at these images, analyzed them, and then said, okay, from this we can conclude that Jesus was an alien and Christianity is an alien cult? Would it be fair?
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely not.
It is downright insulting. So in the same way, calling Ramayana and Mahabharata as mythology is similarly demeaning and insulting to Hindus. And I think Hindus should realize this first. I mean, unless we correct ourselves, there's no point in blaming the West.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, I have never heard mainstream discussions about the scientific validity of the virgin birth of Jesus. But the West is always discussing something or the other about, maybe, for example, the Ram Setu. It's always in discussions. Who built it? How could someone build it so many thousands of years ago? What is the scientific basis to that? I mean, we can prove it scientifically. It has been proven as well. But I'm just saying, like, how we respectfully, we respect another person's faith, that perhaps Jesus had a virgin birth, and not call it mythology. although there are a lot of questions that one can ask from a scientific perspective. So Subhodeep, given the reach and influence of Bollywood, do you think they ought to be more careful and pay attention to the nuances and sensitivities of the culture and civilization that they aim to portray?
Absolutely. They should do it ideally in an ideal world. But the question is, will they do it? I mean, I very much doubt it. See, the fact that Bollywood is Hinduphobic is something we have now understood well, although a lot of people still deny that. And they had been at this for a long time, few decades. But finally, people got fed up in the last few years, and then they started hitting them hard where it hurt. So by basically rejecting the movies. So big ticket movies, where the authors had said, I'm feeling unsafe in India. So they started flopping left, right, center. So this would have been a good time for Bollywood to introspect and change its track. That, okay, why are the audiences rejecting the movies? Is it because the content is bad, or is it are we insulting them by showing the deity hiding in a toilet, things like that? So they chose the wrong track, obviously. So now they are using Hindu stories to portray all sorts of nonsense. They have no idea of what Itihasa means. See, for anything to be called Itihasa, it has to have, let's take one definition. Like Itihasa is something which allows for the flowering of Purusharthas. So what are Purusharthas? Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So Itihasa is that which shows the difference between Dharma and Adharma. It has to have that theme. Itihasa has to show that, okay, Artha is important, definitely, but it has to be grounded in Dharma. And if you do something which is bad, you will be punished. That theme has to be there in Itihasas. It is always there. Then doing the fine things in life, enjoying the pleasures, that is fine, absolutely. But there has to be a limit. And whoever has exceeded that limit, they are punished in some way or the other. Those stories also there in our Itihasas. Similarly, it has this constant theme, like the Bhagavad Gita is part of Mahabharata. Who am I? What is all around? What is Jagat? Who is Ishwar? What is my relationship with the divine? See, all these questions are there for us to reflect on. Now, will Bollywood movie have all these things when they are, reinterpreting our Itihasas? Very doubtful. I don't think it's likely to happen. And especially when I saw the teasers of Adipurush, I've not seen the movie. There's a scene where Rama looks like Jesus or some, that white kind of costume, like some ancient Greek philosopher or something, or more like Jesus. And Hanumanji is made to look like some character from Middle East with a Muslim look. So these are things which are very alien to the way we conceptualize our deities. There's something in the popular imagination, and you can't mess with that. That is very basic, non-negotiable things which you can't mess around with. But Bollywood seems keen to do that. So they are trying to push people as much as possible and trying to see, okay, how much can I push them before people start resisting? How badly can I insult them? And this is not at all acceptable. So unless they change their track and actually introspect that, okay, what we are doing is bad, it is not, it is not respectful towards the Hindu community, I don't see any change happening.
Absolutely. In fact, I read a comment somewhere that it's nothing but just a comical parody of the actual Ramayana. So it looks like it was made to as an insulting movie, or to just make fun of the actual story. And yes, as you rightly said, Ramayana is much more than just a story. It conveys a lot of philosophical truths and messages as to how one should lead an ideal life. And Ramayana is all about evoking the sattva bhava. But this movie, whatever I've seen, it just evokes that Gora tamas. And Ramayana, and especially Sri Rama, is Dharma personified. But I doubt that this movie will be able to deliver that message. So how is this portrayal vis-a-vis different from Christianity, for example?
It is very, very different, totally different. See, the West is very clear where Christianity stands. It's right up there. Correct. So the same History Channel which called Vishnu and Shiva an alien, so they have programs called Jesus, His Life Sneak Peek. So the description is, explores the story of Jesus Christ through unique lens, the people in his life who were closest to him. So the assumption that Jesus is a historical figure is a foregone conclusion. There is no doubt about that. Similarly, National Geographic has programs on the missing years of Jesus. There are documentaries on that. Like scientists investigate signs of Jesus Christ, the unsolved mysteries of Jesus Christ. Not even for 1 second is there a doubt that Jesus or his stories are anything but real. It is 100% real. It is historical. That is the basic assumption. Whereas these same channels have programs on Hindu mythology. A lot of them, they talk of mythology, they talk of the caste system. They have documentaries on caste discrimination and so on, which is, I'm not saying they're bad, but the general portrayal of Christianity vis-a-vis Hinduism is vastly different. So Hinduism has this otherworldly kind of thing. They totally ignore the contribution of Hindu science, technology, nothing of that. Either it's otherworldly or something very fantastic, or the evil things like sati, caste, all those patriarchy, all those kind of things are there in the portrayal. So yeah, the portrayal is totally different for these two.
Yeah. So from all this, we can conclude that the West simply does not acknowledge Hinduism, that is Sanatana Dharma, to be a valid way of life. So everything associated with Hinduism has to be rejected, the gods, the rituals, the beliefs. And sometimes it is done in a very clever way in the name of science, which is again another discipline that is controlled by the West. They hold the power to say what is science and what is not. And we have seen this in the case of Ayurveda and so on, which is absolutely ridiculous. And you're absolutely right, Subhodeep. No aspect of the Bible is considered to be a myth, while the Greek thought is considered as mythology because it is borrowed from the pagan traditions. And it is even more sad that we Hindus are doing this to ourselves. The West laid the path and we are walking it with all our might. And the movie Adipurush is not even worth comparing to the animated version of the Ramayana that was created by the Japanese 30 years ago. It tried its level best to convey the rasas of the Ramayana that it originally intended to do. So hats off to that. And I think we Indians at least should stop using the term mythology, because the term has loaded Western narratives. In the sense, the West uses the term to make sense of the pagan traditions, that is the non-Christians. And the Sanskrit term Itihasa has no equivalent in English. It means Pura Kalpa, that is the past narrative, history, and much more than that. For it also expounds philosophical truth, advice regarding all aspects of life, and so on. So I wish our viewers call this out and be the change that they want to see. Thank you, Subhodeep, for this fascinating and enlightening discussion.
Thank you, Divya. Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.